Good morning, everyone. I hope you've had a good morning, and a good yesterday as well. My name's Greg Keith. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at the Minnesota Department of Education, and I am bringing you welcomes from the Commissioner this morning. As I spoke with the Commissioner about the e-learning summit, she really wanted me to bring thanks to you as a group, and she wanted me to bring thanks to you in really three different areas. Number one, she wanted to thank you for your commitment to innovation and your own professional development. She sees e-learning as one of the areas where education is just really ripe for partnership, ripe for innovation, and she really sees that e-learning is education of the future. She wants me to thank you for the opportunities that you bring to kids and to students, because through e-learning opportunities, we've really increased the rigor that's available to students, and we've really increased the choices that students have in terms of course taking and in terms of schools to attend. And finally, she wanted me to bring you thanks for the options that you offer to students. E-learning offers students increased flexibility. E-learning offers students who might disengage from a traditional setting, an alternative setting that they can engage in and be successful in. E-learning offers students with different learning styles the opportunity to engage and succeed. And finally, e-learning offers students the ability to engage with learning at their own pace, much more so than traditional classrooms do. Personally, I'd like to offer one additional area of thanks. I'd like to thank you for what you do for students in terms of, I really believe e-learning offers students the opportunity to learn employability skills that they don't learn in the traditional classroom. Because of the wave of technology and new ways to collaborate and new ways to work, I really believe that e-learning, be it hybrid learning or online learning, really reflects the way students are going to have to work in the future. So thank you for all that you do, and thank you for the opportunity to welcome you today. I am going to, see, I knew I would do this. I would lose my spot, and this print is really small. I'd like to bring up Kim Lynch, who's going to introduce the keynote speaker, and thanks again.
Greetings, everyone, from the 30 colleges, 7 universities, and 54 campuses of Minnesota State. I have the privilege of working with that entire group, and it really is a privilege. But I have an even greater privilege this morning, and that is to introduce Dr. Alec Couros, who I'm tempted to call a digital era hero. Why? Okay? Because he approaches the changing world of digital tools and social networks with hope for the very best outcomes of collaboration, kindness, and connection. And that feels heroic. Dr. Couros is a tireless advocate of openness in education and demonstrates this commitment through his open access publications, highly successful MOOCs, and open boundary courses. When Dr. Couros is not helping us think about open and connected education spaces, he's a professor of educational technology and media at the Faculty of Education, University of Regina in Saskatchewan, Canada, and a well-respected scholar and researcher. His keynote today, Embracing Open, Networked Learning in a Post-Truth Era, I suspect will resonate long after the e-learning summit is a summer memory. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Alec Couros.
Thank you for that very generous, kind and generous introduction. And hi, everyone. You doing well? It's a real pleasure and honor to be here from Saskatchewan, a Canadian to the north who gets to visit. I've been through Minnesota or through Minneapolis many times, and I've never been out of the airport, so I'm really excited about actually getting out of here. So this is a really tremendous opportunity, so thanks again. As was mentioned, my talk is about embracing open and networked learning in a post-truth era. I'll get a little bit controversial. I'll try to not to be too political, but part of this falls into it. If you want to be connected throughout this or beyond, please feel free to use the hashtag throughout this presentation. And if you want to connect with me on Twitter, I'm at Couros. I'm happy to share the slides afterwards as well. So if you just send me a tweet, I'll make sure that they're all public because I go through a lot of them quite quickly. But I'm very happy to share, give you notes, whatever you need to be successful if it all helps you. So a bit about me. You heard the short story. This is me really when you start to think about how connected we are. This is actually an about.me page, and I get all of my students to create an about.me page for themselves to sort of consolidate and take inventory of their social media presence. So I get a lot of students out of high school, and they have like these Tumblr accounts when they were 13, for instance, and they have these kind of sketchy pasts that they haven't quite deleted yet. And so to start thinking about being a professional, this is one of the things that I do. And this also represents at least my attempt to be quite social in these spaces and to see that there's some importance as an instructor and as a scholar to be in these spaces. If you don't know where Regina is in Saskatchewan, that's where I roughly live. So you'd have to go through Minot, Fargo, I think, and then through maybe St. Cloud, maybe. That's about the biggest ones that you would see there. I can't actually fly here direct anymore. I had to go through Toronto and then kind of come back, so it was interesting. So I've been in the openness field for a while yet. Back when I started out, when I created my first kind of pre-MOOC, I guess, it was called an open boundary course, I was criticized by someone who called me a communist, basically, techno-communist, and so because I give everything away and I love open access and so on. So I actually created a trailer at the time. Now the references are going to be a bit dated, but you might get the idea of what would happen. This is my response to that criticism.
Alec Couros says he's an educator, but has his open doctrine gone too far? In 2008, he facilitated an open online course and made it accessible to the world. Anyone was able to attend. Anyone. And a component of the course relied on students developing their own resources. Their own resources? Is that what they pay for? And what do they know? They're just students. Alec used almost exclusively freely available tools in his course, just like they used back in Soviet Russia. It has even been suggested that Alec Couros may in fact be a Canadian. Alec Couros, don't you think it's time you explained your open doctrine?
So anyway, so if any critiques will be met by a video of some sort, so yeah, thanks. So openness, networks, and social learning is sort of where I'm revisiting, I guess, and this has been my field. But I want to start where I started way back in the day with my technology. This was my first computer, and actually the title here is kind of important, Tech in the Pedagogy of Isolation. This is my world back when I was in 8th grade. This is where I really learned how to do technology back then. I spent hours pulling out books like this, and just typing in code, and usually there'd be some sort of error in the code, so I'd have to kind of actually use my brain for a bit and try to figure out what the error might be. When I taught, I spent a lot of time using Apple IIs as well in the classroom when I was in a high school and middle school teacher. I remember things like Number Muncher. My kids spent a lot of time with it. But for the most time when we used technology, it was just this. It was basically a kid and a computer, and it was personal computing. It wasn't anything beyond this. And this is really where we sat with knowledge for the longest time. The 19th century French artists put this together in terms of the future of learning, which to me reeks of Khan Academy in some ways. But basically this idea that putting forward, we just have to basically put content into our students' brains. In the 1920s, 1925, there was an article on this particular gadget that basically isolated you from all of these distractions from around the world. And so the device was actually created so that was only a single slit of text could be seen at one time. So you don't want to be distracted by all those other lines of text. You want to be very focused on the prize there. In Thailand, this was actually from a school. This was the Thailand Civic Aviation Center. This was the anti-cheating techniques that they use. When turnitin.com doesn't work for you, you want to do some preventative strategies. So this sort of thing, again, this mind your own business learning is sort of something that we've dealt with for a long, long time. And even when you add technology, for the most part, we don't often necessarily become social. Whether it's a one-to-one program, whether it's blended programs, whether it's a discussion forum in an LMS, we don't necessarily become more social by using technology. But what we've seen is a change. There's been certainly a societal change, and for me, the first day I really realized that this was happening, and this is when I was doing my dissertation back in the late 90s, I came across a book. I was half written one dissertation on teacher professional development or something, and then I saw this book, and it was printed off actually by the photocopier machine. It was basically about how open software communities collaborate versus this traditional way that we used to create software, the cathedral versus the bazaar method. And I was taken by this idea that basically through networks and through these really loose networks, you could create something as elaborate and as complex as an operating system. I read an article at the time, well, in the area, a key to transformation is for teaching profession to establish innovation networks to capture the spirit and culture of hackers, the passion, the can-do, the collective sharing. And this is like around when Twitter started to emerge. I mean, YouTube came up in 2005. Twitter is about 2006, I think, or maybe a bit later. You would see at conferences examples like this. This is Eric Whitaker, who basically did this great YouTube thing where he basically composed a piece, conducted it, put it on YouTube. People sang to him. Then he patched together all these singers from around the world and created this incredible virtual choir. Like, we were starting to see these amazing examples that really inspired educators to do these sort of things. I ran into a guy by the name of Zay Frank, who in 2006 did something called The Show. And The Show was like the first vlog ever. Like, if you see vlogs today and you see that rapid cut style, it's because of this guy, Zay Frank. He was an amazing, like every day he put together a vlog episode, and they were amazing. And he put together people from around the world, like on stupid projects, but they're really kind of cool. This was the Earth sandwich. Basically what he got was he gave everyone a tool to find out their polar opposite, and basically got people to lay bread on each side of the sandwich, creating an Earth sandwich. And it was this great idea. Like, he had a song and a challenge, and he called the people. I forget what it was like. I forget what the League of Awesomeness. Like, he gave all the people the special assignments to the League of Awesomeness, and he got people motivated. It was kind of an amazing thing. Or silly things like this. This is one of Zay's project, Young Me, Now Me, which just got people to take their photographs and from the past and recreate them later on. And you saw people with messy faces, right? You saw people like this. This is actually like a first kiss of a couple that met later on, which is kind of amazing. A couple brothers hanging on the tub, right? Right. But there's that collaboration, that fun, that joy that was really in these particular spaces. And I think that was kind of amazing. So we saw this promise of sociality. And this, of course, goes back to social learning. We saw a real shift in social learning. Social learning was big in the 60s, and all of a sudden just kind of went away. And I was just talking to Al earlier that a lot of the stuff is cyclical. I mean, it was back then, and all of a sudden it reappears later. For whatever reason, these things go out of fashion, and they come back in fashion. When we look at, this is Timu Leonin. You'll see the name right away if you want to look up the reference. He talks about the shifts in ed tech from programming, drill, and practice, as I mentioned before, like number muncher and so on. And we kind of moved into this social and open software movement. When you kind of oppose basically individual growth or group growth and then take learning theory on top of that, you have sort of behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism, and now again this era of social learning. So this is kind of where, not that these things disappear, the other things disappear, but we're in a place where social learning can actually happen. In my dissertation back in 2001, 6, I forget what year it was back in the 2000s, before YouTube anyway. this was sort of one of my ideas, this idea of the personal learning network, basically getting, using all of these different tools that we can now have to connect to people across the world. But where I didn't have the emphasis at that time was really understanding that the people on the other end of the spectrum were the most important. It's not the tools. The tools come and go, but these connections that you make have to endure. And that was one of the big things. So really my career, and this is just sort of open networked learning in a nutshell, I try my best to kind of establish this ethos, this ability to connect in new and exciting ways in my classes. And that's kind of been the challenge for me in the last decade or so when I've been involved in MOOCs and so on. But of course, new things emerge, right? We now live in this post-truth reality. So I'm trying to blend these things together. This is a great challenge from the conference committee to kind of bring these two together. They liked a bit of this presentation, a bit of this. And it's really been getting me to think, like, why is this different? Why is this important? Why is open and network learning important in a post-truth era? So again, thanks for the conference committee, and we'll see whether I pass or not. I'm going to start with fake news. And when we think about fake news, we think it's a fairly recent phenomena. But if you use Google Analytics and do a quick search, you can actually see that fake news actually, although it appears in Google searches much later, it's been around for quite a while. If we go historically, and I don't know if you've used the tool Ngram, but it'll actually look for references in literature, in books, for instance, and you'll see that fake news actually peaked in about 1938. Nothing bad happened in 1939 or anything, did it? Right? But you can see it, fake news has been around for a long time. Historically, there's a lot of precedent here. In fact, if we go back to the Battle of Kadesh, this is actually one of the first fake news faces. There was Ramses, who was the emperor at the time, who basically created and fabricated all of these different stories, had people draw these things and create all sorts of artwork around it, making him sound like he was an incredible emperor, that they were very successful in the Battle of Kadesh, where they actually weren't historically. So quotes on Ramses' victory. This is what some of the quotes were. He actually said, "No officer was with me, no charioteer, no soldier of the army, no shared belt." So he was on the battlefront all by himself. "I was before him like Set," which is a god, Roman god. "In his moment, I found a mass of chariots in whose midst I was scattering before my horses." Like just this triumphant leader here. It was the best victory, and nobody does victory better than I do. I have the best victories. All right. Two of those quotes, one of those got in there wrong. One of them is not true, but two of the three, I promise, are real quotes. All right. But so where does fake news, and like if you think about your own experience from fake news, I go back to my days back then. Remember Mikey? Right, yeah, everyone remembers. What happened to Mikey? Does anyone know? He tried it? He liked it. But does anyone know what happened to him in the real? Did you ever hear this rumor? Hey? How did he die? Well, the rumor was, and maybe you didn't get it down here in Minnesota, but when I asked in Wisconsin, they knew that basically there was a rumor.
What's this stuff? Some cereal. It's supposed to be good for you. I'm not going to try it.
Remember, he liked it.
Let's get Mikey. Yeah. He won't eat it. He hates everything. He likes it. Hey, Mikey.
So there was a rumor that basically he ate Pop Rocks and Coke. I don't know if you heard this. Now, some of you are right. And basically blew up. And I don't use transitions very often, but that one was apt. So supposedly, that was the rumor back then, that he basically blew up. Another rumor back in the day, there was a gum when I was in the 80s, and it was called Bubblegum. Anyone know about the rumor about there? Anyone? What's this rumor? Spider eggs, yeah. So this new gum, before bubble gum was some other sort of texture, and all of a sudden it was like chewy, so it had to be spider eggs, obviously, right? Because there's this new chewy, and this was the big thing, that there was all these rumors that there were spider eggs. In fact, the company, which was owned by Lifesaver Company, had to put ads in a number of major newspapers saying there's no spider eggs in our gum, basically. And Bubblegum eventually went out of favor, and then Hubba Bubba and Bubblicious became the things. So urban rumor, urban legends, these sort of things are sort of a precursor to some of the modern fake news that we're seeing here. Now, fake news in 2017, we live in what would you call a post-truth reality. The thing is, and I think this is one of the biggest problems, perhaps the cause, there's a reduced tendency to fact check when a given narrative, meets a psychological, emotional, or emotional need, and or creates, reinforces a desired social reality. I try to do that with fewer slashes, but the whole idea that when we hear news that fits us in a certain way, we sort of let it happen. We don't want to fact check it. We just sort of want to do it. Or if we do fact check it, we check the first thing that literally comes up in Google that reinforces our worldview, and then we say, click it, there you go, there's my argument. I just found something that fits with me. But for the most part, truth no longer matters. And this is a bit of an issue. Whether Mikey died in an accident or not, truth is becoming less of a thing. And the truth that we choose is the truth that fits our worldview. So take a look at an image like this. Depending on the narratives, the left spun it one way, the right spun it in a different way, and depending on where you fit, you're going to take that particular story. And I think it's really important for us to understand this, and this will come down later on. So when we think about it, the best thing about the internet is that it gives everyone a voice. The worst thing about the internet is that it gives everyone a voice. And that's the thing. And we're seeing that anyone can now publish anything. And we've got these powerful platforms for truth or news or whatever it might be, whether it's YouTube or WordPress, you can have your own blog, your own news site. People will abuse it. So let's, for instance, look to Macedonia. Macedonia, Velez, Macedonia in particular, population about 50,000. The average salary of a person, monthly salary, would be about 371 US. Now, what happened there? Anyone know? Well, yes, please. Excellent, fantastic. That sums up basically this whole piece here. So they actually a number of different stories on this. And so this is actually a screenshot of Boris's phone. And Boris is an 18-year-old who basically made about $18,000 in the 3 months that preceded the election. And I mean, you think about it, and these are just two websites that he made a lot of money from. And when you're seeing this, and you're seeing that actually facts don't matter anymore, that you can just put these things out and make a very lucrative salary, it is kind of something. Now, does this matter? Stanford's recent study says that probably it does. In fact, one of the problems with students today is that only about 20% of them, and you can actually see the entire study and you can see what samples they saw, which is quite interesting. Only about 20% of students could identify credible versus non-credible sources and provide reasoning for their outcome. So not only could they not necessarily decide whether something's credible or non-credible, they can't provide a rationale why they think so. And that's the more disturbing piece, which is more important. When you start to think about this, when we think about why, again, this is important, when you start to see before the last election in particular, fake news became and surpassed, I guess, media news, journalism, I guess, what you would say. And that becomes a bit scary in many ways. Now, the reason I've sort of posited these things, so I've got open and network learning, I've got a bit of the fake news and post-truth reality here. I want to give you some ideas, I guess, thinking about my own practice and the practice of other open educators or networked educators, why, what are some of the narratives that we have that we should actually inspect or that we should pull apart, and what are the implications of each? So I guess I'm rethinking open and network learning a bit out loud here, but I'm hoping you'll follow with me. So one of the key tenets, I guess, in this sort of open networked era is that learning to teach and to learn on the open web is of critical importance. More and more educators are starting to find spaces, not just simply in the LMS, but also outside of the LMS. That it's important that we learn from places like YouTube, for instance, that we learn from Wikipedia or whatever it might be, but there are sources that are outside of the control of the professor or out of the teacher that are important. I think this is an important tenet. Why does this matter? Well, we know back in 2001, MIT put out all of their courses out for free. That was a huge shock to the system at the time. We know that there are tons of MOOCs still running. MOOCs aren't dead. They still do exist out there. They turn into a lot of different things, and they're available. And of course, the biggest MOOC of all is this guy over here, YouTube, where you can find a lot of information from anything. And the information is powerful. And like, what have you learned from YouTube? Anyone want to volunteer something that they've learned significant from YouTube? Please. So oil change light off in the car. So what else? Yeah, exactly. Yes? How to remove a kitchen sink. Now, had you thought about that before YouTube, for instance? Yeah, this is something new. What else? Oh, sorry, that was just back there? Interesting. Oh, yeah, I should actually check that. That's been bothering me for a long time. What about, yes, back there? Zucchini bread, okay. So is this mostly like how to fix and how to do, or is it something else beyond this? Nice. Interesting. Yes.
Well, it's not exactly YouTube, but we were talking about around a picnic one day what a weed was.
Right.
And one of the people in our group took a picture of it, posted it on Facebook, and within 5 minutes,
Yeah.
they identified the weed.
Interesting. And I did that same sort of thing with a bug this summer. I sent it up to Twitter, and people right at Twitter right away. They told me exactly what it was, what stage it was at. It was bizarre, really. But that sort of crowdsourcing is really quite something. Now, for me, YouTube, there's all that sort of fixing and how to do stuff, DIY sort of stuff. But there's also great videos like this. This is actually one of my favorite vlogs, I guess, or channels. This is Smarter Every Day. And this guy named Destin, basically, what he does is he kind of does really interesting things that are very, I don't know, they get you thinking. So in this particular case, what he did is he took a bike and he rigged it so that basically if you turn your bike handle to the left, the bike turns right. And if you turn it to the right, the bike turns left. And so you can see right there, right? And he spent like 9 months trying to ride this bike and learn how to do it. But his brain has been, it's basically trained to see reality in a particular way. And what's great about this video, besides the challenge, it's very relational. Like it basically helps you understand this very quick. Like he's a relatable type guy. It's very storied. It takes a narrative approach. Like lots of fun there. It's inquiry based. Like basically the whole thing is based on what if I did this? What would happen? His son, by the way, learned it in 3 weeks, and him being a younger boy, the neuroplasticity is kind of explained there a little bit. And it's very accessible. Deep scientific concepts that are picked up really quickly. But this is the sort of stuff that we're competing with in many ways. And it's not just people teaching us stuff, it's also people showing their learning. So this is Jordan, a 5-year-old kid learning to rap, shares his experience with you.
I'm going to show you how to write a hip-hop song in 30 seconds, and the first thing you're going to need is a beat. Now we're going to need piano. Now we're going to need strings. Now you're going to need bass. Now you need to rap about your problems. I wanted a cookie, but my mom said no. So I took it anyway, so that's how it goes. Now use it. Just use it. Got brownie for a week, candy cane. Now I got street cred, more than Drake. Now use it. Just use it.
All right, 5-year-old Jordan from Brampton, Ontario. Yeah, right. All right. So seeing all these things, they've inspired me to get my students also sort of learning out there in many different ways. So my students actually do something called a learning project, where basically they take anything they've always wanted to learn and they have to document how they're learning it, use online and offline sources, and share that with us. And so it's sort of a metacognitive practice, I guess, and taking on things. So one of my students learning ukulele, another student learning how to use Japanese. Of course, I don't know how to do ukulele or I don't speak Japanese either. So I have to kind of figure out as a network educator, how do I assess these things? Like, first of all, I'm assessing for how they're sharing their learning for me, but I'm not necessarily assessing for a competency or fluency in Japanese. But I do want to make sure that they're not just totally lying to me. So I find people on Twitter to say, okay, does this sort of resemble Japanese, or things like that. I get students like who've never painted before who take on things like painting. Of course, there's great teachers on the web like Bob Ross, right?
I'm glad you could join me.
So we bring on Bob Ross. One of my students here takes on a Bob Ross painting, and this is how he demonstrates how he's learning it, or the process of him learning it. Takes up Bob Ross, finds a tutorial. Great never painted before. It's kind of amazing. something like this. Now, this also leads to some amazing serendipity. With my students basically saying that they can't learn, all of a sudden they run into strangers sometimes on the web, and sometimes these strangers help them. One of my most notable examples is actually a co-instructor of mine who does the same project. His name is Dean Sharesky. He decided, if I'm doing this with my students, I'm gonna do it myself. I'm gonna learn alongside my students, which I think is fantastic pedagogical practice. So he takes up guitar, starts posting his videos to YouTube. He sucks. And basically, he's having trouble putting together a chord and whatever else. So, but he's posting it, and he runs into, through a serendipitous action, a music teacher from Connecticut, I believe, Brad Schneider, who notices that this guy is sort of struggling to learn guitar. So he gets his grade 12, he's actually a music teacher in high school, he gets his grade 12 students to basically connect with Dean. So these students from Connecticut basically create videos for my friend in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, to learn guitar. So Austin's here, creates a video like, Dean, I notice you can't keep a beat, so here's some strategies for it. But it's just a really wonderful thing. And so this is that raw, amazing network stuff, right? But we have to also remember that kids, our students, are vulnerable. They can run into all sorts of misinformation, run into people that are perhaps not as nice as some of these kids or the music teacher, and we have to prepare them for that. So that's the next thing. What are some of the relevant concerns around this that we bring students together? Probably, I can go on all day about harassment and all of the other things that are probably more important than the next ones I bring up, but because this is a presentation on post-truth, it's important to talk about information literacy to start off with. So it's amazing how many high school students, elementary students I run into that have no idea this is wrong. Like, test your kids. Like, we have to remember that our kids grew up in a time that there was always internet. They've never been in a pre-internet world, and I think that's amazing. So, this idea that you see an example, this is a YouTube example, where someone creates a video that, how to charge an iPod using electrolytes and an onion. And it's a total fraud, but basically what the guy does is takes onion and puts it in Gatorade, soaks it up, recharges the electrolytes, and then basically is able to plug in his phone, and it looks really good, it looks convincing, and it doesn't really harm anything, it just gunks up your cable, but person after person after person does this, tries it, and you can actually see other people on the comments basically saying, this is amazing, thanks for helping me save $50, and so on. So it's like this big joke that just keeps on going and tricks people all the time. One that's a bit nefarious, I guess, a bit worse, is one that came out when iOS 8 came out, and this was Google Wave. It was a fake poster created by some of the jokers at 4chan that basically said that if you put your phone in the microwave, you can now charge it. This is a new feature of iOS 8. So people started posting their phones, in microwaves, blowing them up on the phone, on Twitter. And then people like this, right, tried out the new Apple Wave feature of iOS 8. Wow, never charge faster. Jerk, like seriously, right? So that's a big thing. Information literacy is huge. How do we know what's true? How do we know what has authority, what doesn't have authority? How do we go through that? And kids are really lost in that respect. In fact, adults are lost in that respect. And we're not necessarily the best models of it. I still find myself saying, I need to go the next page in Google. I can't rely on the first page. I need to go deeper on some of these things. And I often don't, and I have to take that responsibility. So to do this, to help build better information literacy, certainly we've done, in high schools and elementary school, we start with things like this, fake sites. This is the Pacific Northwest tree octopus, if you ever wanted to find it, which is, great. You're not quite in the Northwest, but if you, drive, you might run into these things on the highway, so watch out. But other things and other spoof sites like this is the DHMO site, so the science people here might know what this is. But if you read it, everything's totally true, right? Basically, they're trying to ban DHMO. And DHMO does, in fact, and I'll tell you this, 100% true, death due to accidental inhalation of DHMO, even in small quantities, prolonged exposure to the solid form causes severe tissue damage. Excessive ingestion produces a number of unpleasant, though not typically life-threatening side effects. Now, DHMO is really dihydrogen monoxide, which is actually just water. So you get kids convinced that they should ban water from the world, but all these things are true, and it just shows you how truth can be slanted in a particular way. Now, There's all sorts of tools like CRAP, for instance, which is one that, that is typically used, and I think can be used very well, but is often not used very well at all. In fact, some of the criteria itself have issues, right? Because if we are, if you think about currency, currency has some credit when it comes to verifying whether something's good. Is it new? Well, maybe it's too new, right? Maybe this is kind of sloppy journalism that's put out. When we think about things like relevance, what's the relationship between relevance and confirmation bias? Like, it's relevant to me, perhaps, but is it too relevant? Authority, what is authority relative in today's worldview? Like, when someone, when we think of people in power, for instance, not all these people we may or may not trust, for instance. What if accuracy or truth is less important than belief when we think about accuracy, when it doesn't really matter? Or, for instance, purpose. It's very difficult to assess purpose these days because some of the purposes are not to basically give factual information, they're often to deceive. So I would suggest a really great resource for any of you here is a free ebook. It's Web Literacy for Student Fact Checkers. I would check it out. I like the approach. It's a guy by the name of Mike Caulfield. And he suggests basically 4 moves and a habit. Look for previous work, like places like PolitiFact and other places that are, Snopes even, reputable fact checker type sites. Go upstream to the source of the article, which means, like, what are other things about the same story? Read laterally means what are people saying about your source? What do other people say about your source? And there's a lot of search mechanisms within that, and then circle back. Keep on doing it until you feel really validated and satisfied with your findings. And the biggest thing, I think, check your emotions. If you feel like you have to share something really quickly, like just feel like I need to get this out on Facebook really quickly, you need to check those emotions because it may be influencing your decisions to put these things out there. So those sort of things I think are really important. So start thinking differently about the way we fact check. And curiosity is a big deal. In the age of Google, remember, we are in a place that we can learn things very quickly. I was in a grocery store with my son. He asked me, like, the greatest question a kid at 6 years old can ask. He says, "Dad, do bananas grow tips up or tips down?" Right? And you'll get this, right? Being from Minnesota or the area, we don't get bananas in Saskatchewan, right? So I don't know what this is, but I can Google things like no other. So I Googled it really quickly, images of banana plants or trees, and I basically stuck that, this is a dramatization, I stuck it into my kid's face really quickly without even asking myself what I might think about that, and certainly not asking my son about that. And I think that's a bit of the problem. And I wrote a really guilty blog post about this because I realized that I didn't give a chance for my kid to be curious. I relied too heavily on things like Google, and I didn't even wonder for 1 second what it might be. And so we have an ethical obligation, a cognitive obligation, certainly, that when we have when the distance between knowing and not knowing is so short, so tiny, how do we extend that? How do we actually spend some time in wonder and curiosity? And if we're not doing that, we're going to be in big problems when it comes to actually checking the truth. So that was one strategy anyway. Another big narrative of this open and connected learning is that if we establish a positive digital identity, it's becoming increasingly important that we have to put ourselves out there. If we want to connect authentically to people, we need to have a good digital footprint. We need to be connected. We certainly had to be cognizant about that. And I even started that in my first couple of slides there. So why does this matter? We hear from a lot of different employers, and I think it does matter, certainly, that employers or future employers that, for instance, that schools are looking for this and recruiters are looking at this. I think it was Harvard recently that rejected 10 confirmed applicants, I think, because of their misogynist accounts in particular groups. There's been a lot of students expelled, for instance. I like this quote from Gardner Campbell, who actually talks about the importance of having even a particular web space. He actually calls sort of a personal website sort of the personal cyber infrastructure, that it's really important for kids to have a space that's theirs, not just simply something that is Facebook's or Twitter's, but a space that they can call their own on the web, to really own and not to rent. At the University of Mary Washington, you may have heard of this project. It's called the Domains of One's Own project. You come in as a student, they give you a domain name, and basically trying to get you to think about your digital identity. And I think that's a great strategy. It's proactive. rather than waiting what happened, to what happened at Dalhousie University in Canada, a dentistry school, where there was a horrible, basically, group on Facebook of students who were posting all sorts of horrible things that really damaged the reputation of their dentistry college, as well as the university, that the university paid hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to try to scrape that from the web. Let's invest in our students' identities. So that's my pitch to you. I think this is important. But there are issues from it. And I'll talk about those issues in a second. Sorry, I kind of got out of step there. But for my practice, some of the things that I'm working on, I get students certainly to think about their own identity. Many of them buy their own domain name, but certainly I get students to create their own blogs. Even on Twitter, creating professional spaces on Twitter, making sure that they're professional out there. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about it, but at the same time, not putting too much out there. And that's one of the concerns that we see, is putting too much out there. And certainly not the wrong things out there. Relevant concerns. Probably some of the scary stories that I teach students, or I tell or I share with students, are things like this. You probably remember or have heard the name Justine Sacco. If you don't remember that name, you might have remembered this tweet at some point. So this is an ad executive who says something just absolutely ridiculous on Twitter. And she got held to account. Like she really suffered from this, and and we can talk about forgiveness and all those other things, but she certainly had her day in Twitter court that day. So she tweets that. She gets on a plane from London Heathrow to Cape Town, South Africa, and Twitter exploded with the hashtag, "Has Justine landed yet?" And so this person says, "Has Justine landed yet?" may be the best thing to happen to my Friday night. So a lot of people not doing anything else, they just want to basically, public shame and mob someone. If I can just get Justine Sacco fired, my day will have been well spent. And she certainly did get fired by this. Twitter, as John Ronson, there's a book he writes about public shaming, and there's a TED Talk if you want to watch the shortened version. He says, Twitter took control of her life and dismantled it piece by piece. And I think this is a danger, that we have to be thoughtful. We have to make sure that our students understand that what they post online, they can be basically held accountable for this. So what are the risks? What are the rewards of being online? How do we get students to basically, if they have negative stuff out there, how do we actually get them to try to remove it, to try to scrape it, or to build things that are more positive that'll take precedent over those spaces? So something that's more and more important. Privacy is a big issue as well. And I spend a lot of time talking to law enforcement about scams, and in particular romance scams. And this is also this post-truth piece, that we don't even know who anyone really is online these days. And it's worse and worse all the time. If you check your Facebook feed, if you get friend requests from people that have perhaps no friends that are common, or just people that you thought you friended before, but all of a sudden there's a second account, there's a good chance those people are catfishers. And that's what romance scams is. And I'll explain why I'm so interested in romance scams. Well, my photos have been used for the last decade in catfishing scams. So this is actually from photos of my children, photos of my family have been used in these scams to basically, they're all over like Tinder and eHarmony and you name it. And in Facebook, Twitter, and Twitter profiles. So I really have to work on really solidifying the authentic me online, which is not always easy. This is an example. Here's me as Alex Gallert on Facebook. Again, this is not something I created. These are scammers who do this for money, to basically romance women, to ultimately get money from them. What's sad about this is they also have my real daughter's photos, and they created a connected portrait of connected accounts to bring some more validity to this network. My mother, right, who's also Maria Gallert, my mother mourning my real father's passing, right? Using these photos for emotional response. So everything you put out there, those things that are the most liked, those emotional photos, they can be used against you in many ways, and be thoughtful about that. Here's my OkCupid profile. I'm Raymond Tron there. So this is my profile. I'm good in talking with people. I'm good in singing. I can play guitar. I can write poems. I'm a catch. What people notice about me, the way I dressed, my dressing, my style of dressing. Anyway, fake photos of me. This used to be my daughter. Now it's a dog. Right? It didn't fit into their narrative, so they created another photo. I wasn't in an accident. I'm not an oil engineer guy. I'm not a general. These are all photos. This is the real one, by the way. So I used Google reverse image search to find the source of this. Now, victims sent all these profiles, victims who lost money to these people sent me these photos, usually very angry at me. And I get 1 or 2 a day. Fake passports. Can you tell why it's a fake passport? Would you know really quickly why this might be a fake passport? A lot of... What's that? Well, besides being Canadian, yeah, that's right. It's true, I'm not a US citizen. But even like this photo, I actually, if you would zoom down, it's actually me with like a rye whiskey in my hand. They cut that part out, which is surprising. But the photo would be one. This one's a bit better. I look much younger there. But even things like that, the 870925, there's actually coding in the numbers that actually mean something. So there's little things that you might know about passport verification that are all part of understanding what's truth and what's fake out there. So some key areas of focus when we think about this. First of all, of course, identity is important. And I like this quote from Eric Schinniger. If we don't tell your story, someone else will, and more often than not, another's version will not be the one we want told. Whether it's harassing things or whether it's bad reputation, we know that identity is really built in this new world, this TripAdvisor economy, I guess, in many ways, that what matters is not simply what we say about ourselves, but what other people say about us too online. And this is becoming really important. Reputation is huge currency in this world for our kids. We see great examples of this. This is a grade 1 classroom in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. They do great things in Moose Jaw. This is a classroom teacher that does it really well, does it respectfully, doesn't show the students necessarily, like shows them in sort of with a lot of other people, but doesn't show names, gets certainly consent from parents, and for the most part, when it's individual, it's just the artifacts. You might hear the student's voice, but not the kid's voice, but you can see it, and kids are using things like this, for instance. As an example, this is the teacher has a Twitter account, and basically what they do is they allow students to suggest good tweets, and then they vet it as a group, whether this is something that they should actually have online, which I think is really good practice. We should probably do this more often. And one of the things I think is really important is to think about, being intentional about having students online. I believe, personally, that students need private and public interactions in our institutions. But we have to do these intentionally and be thoughtful about how we do them, and to certainly give choice about these things. But to not have any experience, I think, is not the right approach to do this, but help them through this and to be scaffolded and supported, because eventually when they leave our institutions, they'll want to be in those spaces. They want to participate in these spaces. I find from undergrads, I don't want to date that guy because he has no online presence. He's creepy, obviously. So stuff like that. So whether it's a relationship or whether it's someone who's getting hired, not having anything online in the world of the digital world just seems a bit odd. Or it seems like, what have you been doing with your life? Where can I find your best work as an employer? That's the question I'm asking, is where can I find your best work? And it better be online for the most part. Even knowing things like reverse Google image search that I mentioned before. So if you see someone's profile, right? This is a fake Amat Tremofalgov Sergei, for instance. Taking that photo, I just drop it to my desktop, going to images.google.com, and then you can actually see that you can do a reverse Google image search, and you can find the origin of that particular image, which is kind of a cool little trick, right? And you can see that this was under a lot of scams. So doing stuff like that, knowing the basic literacies around that, because it's going to get a lot harder and scarier. This is an example. This is a pretty new technology.
We present a novel real-time facial reenactment method that works with any commodity.
So I won't show the whole video here, but basically there is technology exists. If you use face swap, same sort of idea, but this is like face swap on steroids. You can take anyone's face, and by using your face basically as a remote control, make that face do anything you want.
We can see the final output of our method.
Imagine this showing up someday, right, on Twitter, some powerful person perhaps being imitated.
Our system reconstructs and tracks both source and target actors.
Saying the wrong thing. So even what you see, the old adage, what you see is, I'll see it when I believe it, or Pixar didn't happen. it's not the same anymore. So this is what's happening, and we have to be very thoughtful. We have to be very, very careful, and we have to continue to scrutinize these truths out there. All right. Third one, last one, is developing a personal learning network is an essential support for modern learning. And I think this is important, that we have to be connected in some ways to learn. And in fact, for us to learn truth these days, I think we have to rely on those who come before us. We are all fact checkers, hopefully, in this room, and being connected to each other makes us stronger in many ways. So using the same mechanisms that the Macedonian scammers use, networks, to use it to tell truth are really important things. So why does this matter? Barry Wellman, I love this quote, "The developed world is in the midst of a paradigm shift, both in the ways in which institutions are connected. It is a shift from being bound up in homogeneous little boxes to surfing life through diffuse, variegated social networks." And I'll just show you a visual that makes more sense of this. Students in little boxes. Think of your LMS that never see the outside world. Then there's globalization. That might be an instructor who starts to get people to connect through Twitter or Facebook or whatever it might be to an outside world. But ultimately, when our students leave our institutions, they should be in that camp. This networked individualism. I'd actually like to see networked collectivism, but I'm a Canadian communist, so that's what it is. But this idea that at least they can be self-determined, independent, autonomous learners in those boxes, and they don't need us to learn anymore, that they can do it competently and safely is really important. One of my favorite examples, this is an 8th grader who gets learning, and I think it's really amazing. So he got an assignment to create a bow drill, which basically start fire with some sticks, but rather than do it the old way, like try to learn it yourself, he set on he put up a YouTube video and asked his network to help him with his homework.
Hello, I'm trying my hardest here to make a bow drill set. See this is my spindle, and this is my block that you put on the top. So when you're spinning it around like that, so it won't melt into your hand. And then this is the bow that I use, and I just use some paracord, nylon paracord. And then this is the hearth that's made out of yellow cedar. The hole is right there, and I tried another hole, but that was too deep, so it didn't really work. And then this is the tinder, it's just normal dry lint. And I'm going to show you how I do it. And I'm doing it wrong, I know I am. And please comment down below so you can teach me how to do it, okay?
So, great comment. He gets 15,000 hits the last time I took a screenshot, which is amazing for this really obscure video, right? Like, to get that many, like most of us, I don't have 15,000 hits on most of my videos. And it's great. Like, this is the long tail in action. Like, the first one, I'm sitting here with my four friends, and we all bow drill. Like, that's the first comment he gets, which is amazing, because I don't know one person in the world that bow drills, and he's able to find, like, a community. Like, 4 is definitely a community, right? If it's bow drillers. But that's amazing to me, that this sort of thing, and it shows networks in action. And this sort of thing is still possible, whether it's crowdsourcing or whatever else. This idea of the strength of weak ties does make a difference. For my own practice, I've been running MOOCs. For instance, back in 2012, I think, I put out a tweet and said, anyone interested in taking a MOOC? And 12,000 people showed up, which is like a really hard issue to have, but it was amazing to see, to participate in that. One of the things that was really important to me in that time is how do I develop presence in this community? So the very first project in the class was because I had this problem of 12,000 students trying to get them to see that they can do things together collectively, being the communist Canadian, collectively. And so I actually decided to put together a lip dub, and if you want to see how to do it, just Google making of the @MOOC lip dub, and I'll just show you what happened. Basically, I got students from around the world to send me, we chose a song, we did it all democratically, then they sent up examples of them lip dubbing, and it looked something like this when we were done. That's my brother, by the way.
Tonight, I'm gonna have myself a real good time. I feel alive. And the world turning.
Well, that's time for the whole thing, but you can kind of see as people come in, this is just one of the examples of people from around the world, but just like Red Deer, Canada to Uruguay, and just basically doing this sort of thing helped us see that we could create some presence, that we could start building at least partial communities within this big space. So width is one of the many things that I think are important. Now, they're all relative concerns. When you build communities in these spaces, one of the worst things that can happen is that you start to believe in each other, beyond, believe everything that each other says, because you're in this filter bubble. If you haven't seen Eli Perzer's Filter Bubble TED Talk, you should, or read his book. But this is really important, understanding that the services we use, such as Facebook and Google, are making us dumb, I guess, in many ways. Basically, in many ways, when we search for something, it'll give us back results that we already know, that are to satisfy a worldview. It never gives us the ability to, for instance, find information that's really disruptive to our worldviews. And it keeps us in these silos. And I'll get more to it, but this is something that we have to be very, very thoughtful about. When that student over here, for instance, is searching for something, and this student over here who's opposed, and they search for the same thing, they will get very different results. They will see very different Facebook feeds, and that's one of the reasons they're not talking to each other. And that's one of the reasons we're not talking to each other. And this sort of thing, right? I've heard from rhetoric from both sides. Time to do my own research on the real truth. Literally the first link that agrees with what you believe, right? And that's the answer. Or Mark Twain says, it ain't what you know, what you don't know what gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that ain't so. The idea of confirmation bias that was summed up so nicely by Twain, right? Key areas of focus, and I think it's really important for us to look at tools. There are a lot of tools that exist. This is from the Washington Post, I think blue feed, red feed. That just shows you an example of if you pick this search term, this is what someone who's predominantly left-minded or right-minded will see in their Facebook post. And it's very, very different. Or there's tools like My Political Bubble that kind of shows, it does an analysis of your Facebook feed and kind of puts you where you are and gives you how many, like that's my friends over there, blue, all over the blue side, but I have very few on the right. And perhaps I need to have more there. What do you want to understand better? This is something called Escape Your Bubble that actually, every once in a while, plops things into your Facebook feed that are disruptive to you. It actually takes things that are a bit different for you. For my students, one of the biggest things is to get them to think critically all the time and not to believe what I'm saying. So for instance, most of you know what this photo is from the 60s. Yes, who's this, right? Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald. My students, born in like 2000s, I guess by this point, don't have any idea. Plus they're Canadians, they don't know this stuff. But they often don't know who the people in this photo are. So I give them this photo at first, at the beginning of class. I say, this is Lee Harvey and the Wailers. We're an amazing 60s band, and I make up music and that sort of thing. I want them to disbelieve me. I want them to say I'm full of it, right? I want them to think all the time, to be critical. There's a great blog post by a guy by the name of, I forget what the name is, but it's a guy who basically talks about my favorite liar. He talks about his favorite university professor, and this professor basically came to class the very first day and he said to his students, every single day I'm going to tell you a single lie. And so students spend the entire semester trying to figure out where the lie is in the lectures, which keeps them on task, which keeps them thinking all the time and not just simply taking notes. They're critical all the time. At the very end of this semester, they couldn't figure out where the lie was in the last semester until one student kind of clued in and said, oh, the very first class you said I'm going to tell a lie in every single class, right? Which was kind of amazing, right? And it's just kind of a great way to think about it. So how do we help students beyond the tools? Like tools are going to help us only so far. How do we create that critical disposition in students to always be on their toes, to think that what I'm being told is something that I may or may not really want to believe? So in conclusion, one of my favorite recent articles is this, How We Broke Democracy. And he talks about, his name is Tobias Rose Stockwell. And he goes by Tobias Rose on Twitter. How We Broke Democracy. And he talks about really this sort of pushing, this your facts versus my facts, and how it's really splitting us together. What happens to our learning environments when we're that opposed in some of our beliefs? And I love this quote from the article. The precursor to building walls around nations is building walls around ideas. And I think this is something that we have to be thoughtful about. So in ed tech, and I think the purpose of ed tech is finding this space. How do we actually help us understand one another? How do we actually get to the point where we're actually listening to one another? And I think this is more important. Now, going back to my father, who I mentioned passed away some years ago, The technologies that were really important back then, weren't about YouTube and content and things like this. Like we used to spend a lot of time using the technology or the tool or the internet as a place to look up stuff. Like that was our biggest use. But we have to start thinking about the technology to connect with each other deeply in many ways. So back then, my dad was able to connect with my kids, a 3-hour drive, but we could do it via FaceTime or via Skype. And so one of my favorite examples, if you haven't seen this one, this is actually a connection between a school in Brazil and a school in, actually a seniors home in the US, where basically the project was, how do we get these students who are trying to learn English connected with someone who's an authentic connection. And I think this is just one of these really beautiful projects that you see that builds in empathy, that builds in connection in many deep ways.
We created a tool that connects our students with seniors in the USA living in retirement homes.
Hello, hello.
Melissa.
Hi, Dick. Can you hear me? Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
It's the first time that I'm talking with someone from another country.
I'm very excited to be doing this.
I look like I'm only 25, but I'm 88.
Do you have sisters and brothers?
No, I'm one child.
Only one? Oh, you poor fella.
I'm living with my old brother. He has 23 years.
Do you know, instead of saying he has 23 years, you could say he is 23 years old.
I tried to go to Lollapalooza that we have next week, I think, in Brazil, but my mom didn't let me.
She got a good mom.
Good morning, dear Julia. Good morning to you.
This is your dad?
That's me and my wife when we were young.
Oh, you were good looking when you were young. And you're still good looking.
My first destiny is United States, of course, because I wanted to put better my English.
Well, you do very well, I must say.
Are you planning someday to go to Brazil?
Oh, I would like to.
You can stay in my house if you want.
If you could just dream and have whatever you want, what do you think you would like to be doing?
I see myself in a big family, with a beautiful wife. And I want to thank you for this change of experience, You are incredible.
Obrigado.
You are my new granddaughter.
And I love you.
I love you too.
And if you were here, I would give you a big hug.
Oh yeah, let's hug. Bye.
Bye.
So the motto of the project was more than better students, better people. And so the last statement really is, if you're thinking about your own practice, like how do we move from just delivering content to facilitating understanding empathy, and just connection. And I think that's one of the most important things we need to do. So if you want to connect with me, that's where I am. It was a privilege, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Couros, for a very enlightening and entertaining talk. And we learned, I think, a lot about social media, networking, and openness using the internet and other forms of interaction. So my name is Al Bites. I'm the director of the Center for Educational Innovation at the University of Minnesota. And our center basically works with faculty, staff, and administrators to develop innovative curricula, to practice the best pedagogies using evidence-based approaches, and to develop high-quality online and face-to-face learning. So we spend a lot of time in this area and try to come up with the best innovative, high-quality online programs that we can. That being said, I think there's time to open the floor up for some questions for Dr. Couros. So I'd like to do that. So if you have a question, Bob will run around with the microphone and feel free.
I'm not scary, I promise. Yes, please.
I have a question. There's been a lot written in the Chronicle of Higher Education lately about shaming and bullying of faculty. There's the white marble example. And a lot of faculty are getting very concerned that they're being misrepresented and that they're taking a lot of heat for things sometimes they didn't even say. Have you been studying this recent phenomenon?
So I have, actually, there's slides that I was going to include and I would start here. We've been taught for a long time to be totally neutral online, to be beige, and I think that's got to end, especially when it comes to faculty. We're often, I mean, I know it's very difficult to do that, especially for non-tenured faculty. Joel Westheimer has an interesting piece around, this is actually quite old, but what kind of citizen are you? There's the personal responsible citizen that goes out and tends to their garden, pays their taxes, and they're that good. There's participatory, which might do some fundraising, but that justice-oriented citizen, like if we don't speak up for others online, or face-to-face, I think it's important. So to think about, I'm going to move beyond these ones, but think about finding the root causes to some of the problems. And whether it's shaming or whether it's these pieces, we have to learn better as faculty to how do we avoid these conversations, how do we filter them, how do we mute them, but at the same time, how do we not back down to some of these as well, especially when they're oppressive to ourselves or to the students that we serve. So I think it's a really tough time to be vocal online, but I think we have to move out from being beige and to think about, especially with thinking about the privilege that we do have in many cases for many of us, to be able to speak out and to think more justice-oriented around some of these pieces. So that's where I'd start.
Other questions?
Other questions?
Back there.
Thank you, Dr. Couros, for your talk today. My question has to do with what makes what you're talking about so much more pressing now? I mean, there have been state actors, the church. I'm a Catholic, so I can say that in the past.
Yeah.
The earth is flat. We orient around, the sun orients around us. Why is now so much more pressing the need for valid information, the literacy among students, et cetera, than, say, all time up until now?
Yeah, I think, the simple answer, which you could have said yourself, is, the unprecedented speed. When we go back to the printing press, for instance, it was meant to consolidate power for the Catholic Church, but all of a sudden Luther comes around and there are 95 theses put in, and then the King of France at the time actually outlawed the use of printing presses to do anything that wasn't sanctioned by the Catholic Church. But now we have no ability to do that, which I think is great, which was the comment about being the most powerful and least powerful. We have technologies that are, I think, studies are really divided on the whole idea of the filter bubble, but for the most part, what's not being disputed is the lack of empathy that it's creating. So whether or not the filter bubbles change the election is one thing, but whether or not it's actually affecting empathy is something that's not disputed. And because it's so quick, because anyone has the ability to publish very quickly and to disseminate quickly, another Mark Twain quote was basically, and I'll probably butcher this, but it's the idea of how a fiction crosses across the world before a truth gets a chance to put on its shoes. And I think that's the difficult. It's sometimes these false notions are so compelling that they travel so quick and that it doesn't have a chance for truth to actually follow it. And of course, you're absolutely right that this has been something that's been going on. I just think the unprecedented speed and the ability for more and more people with a lot of perhaps not the best interests in mind are doing this. And people that are outside of the nation, outside of who are doing for monetary purposes, who aren't most deeply affected by some of the issues that it may cause. So I guess that's, sorry, not a great answer, but the best I got right now, so thanks. Yes, please.
Thank you so much for your talk this morning. So we exist in a time right now where we have a lot of, let's say, scholars participating in network scholarship, teachers participating in PLN, personal learning networks, and then students in connected learning activities. But there seem to be gaps, or I guess an absence of bridges. Can you say something to us about how we as educators more comfortably exist or coexist with students in online spaces?
That's a great question. Because obviously we're always worried about, am I sharing too much? Do I want students to know this particular space? Well, like we kind of push students to these uncomfortable spaces. Like lots of my students, before I put them on Twitter or asked them to go on Twitter, had never been on Twitter. It's not their space. I have to get better at understanding where are they comfortable in. For my, I try to justify it as saying, teachers are on there. Like the teachers that teachers are on there, and if you want to connect as a student, you should be in these spaces. But at the same time, there are always some that sort of reject that particular space. The best way that I've dealt with this, to sort of get back to your question, is I'm trying my best to model this, to model how much I should show. I'm very open about the negative things that have gone on, but by far, 99% of the time, it's very positive. I try to support choices. I just try to support students in the development of their profiles. I try to give them healthy feedback. One of the things that's really been good about this is students who have taken my courses before, like when I use a hashtag for every one of my courses, students who have taken my courses over the last 10 years are using that hashtag. And so I see a lot of alumnus who come in and support the students in, and they feel it makes it more real, because I'm this 40 plus professor who's telling them one thing, but their 20-something peers that are just out somehow can connect with them in a deeper way that I can't give them. That's that grade 1 teacher down the hall, down the road, or something that helps them. And I think that's been the way that I've been trying to get in, is to build in more of those authentic communities, trying to find them and try to find other places. One of the things I'm maybe looking at this year, because students are still on Facebook more than they are on Twitter, is Facebook groups has been revamped. So I wonder if, that's one of the things I ponder as an instructor. What if we go from Google+, which no one uses except my classes, to maybe Facebook Plus as our private or Facebook groups as our private community. So I'm always sort of looking for that space, and I never find the right one, but I think it's important for us to keep on looking. All right, thanks for your question. Sorry.
Christina?
Hi, good to see you again.
About sharing, using technology to connect and to collaborate and to share, and maybe to even put together two needs and then resolve both of them, kind of. And I wonder how we can, what advice you have for our institutions, because all I see is how organizations, our physical world is not organized like that. Our technology is offering these possibilities, but how do we reform the world? I feel like the world needs a redesign in many places, and how do we get from here comfortably to the next space where we can do more of that?
So I'm going to just tease part of your question then. George Valatsianos at the Royal Rose University does a lot of stuff around network participatory scholarship, and I think he sees the role as a professor, for instance, is a bit, I don't know if unhinged is the right term, but like it's uncoupled from the institution in some ways. So you see that much more collaboration amongst peers and colleagues who are writing together, not necessarily the person writing down the hall. I think it's really important that we do local as well, but I think you're seeing more and more instructors establish themselves outside of the institution and building digital reputations for themselves. And I think that's more of the world than the institutions that are artificial constructions. Whether it's another good example, perhaps a good example is my students, as I mentioned before, all of them have blogs. Now, while I do this, and they all have their own WordPress blog, I've noticed that other instructors are coming on board who also bring in the same blogging assignments. And so more and more of my students are doing this stuff outside of the LMS. And we just simply use a category for every class, and all of this stuff comes through one space, and students are becoming much more interdisciplinary. So the boundaries between courses is becoming better, much more blurry. Students are seeing connections between courses, and I think some of the silos here, even in our disciplines, are starting to come down. And so that's two examples I think that might be useful, but we can certainly talk more about that.
Okay, in the interest of moving on, I'd like to
Thanks again.
Couros for a great talk.
As I mentioned, feel free to email me anytime, and you can have those slides if you like.
All right, so for the next portion of our talk, we're going to move into the second annual e-learning summit awards, and I'd like to introduce Leslie Blicker, who's the director of the LMS Learning and Next Generation Technology for Minnesota State, and she'll be the host for the awards. Leslie.
Just get out of your way here. Oh, I can do that. Okay. Thanks, Al.
This mic is working, right? Yeah. Okay. Are you ready? Okay. Well, oops, cards. Hi, everyone. We realize that this segment is what stands between you and lunch, but we're really excited to be up here again for the second annual Excellence Awards, e-learning Excellence Awards. Before I start, I was introduced already, but I'd like to also introduce the committee, and actually the true chair of the committee is Karen LaPlante, formerly from Hennepin Technical, recently retired in the last 2 months, but still giving her tireless time to conferences on her own time, and will continue on next year as the chair of the Excellence Committee. And then joining us this year is Tony Lyson from the University of Minnesota. And it gives me great pleasure to be able to bring up recipients. But before I do, I really want to take a moment and encourage everyone to think about applying next year. I think we're so conferenced out and we see a lot of awards and we go about our business and we just think, ho-hum, we're just doing the ordinary. Forgive me for a moment. How many of you have ever seen the Seinfeld episode on, how do we create a show out of nothing? Have you ever seen that? Anybody? Okay. So remember they're talking about, what did you do this morning? What did you do? I woke up and I took the bus in. See, there's a show, right? Bear with me. How many of you have ever put up an online course and you're pretty proud of it? Come on, raise your hand. Now don't lower your hands. Sorry, this can be about 2 minutes. Keep your hands up. How many of you support students or faculty in the work that they do? Okay, how many of you have been involved in and if you had 10 hands, I'd have that. How many of you have been involved in a collaborative project that you've completed that somehow has impacted others for the good of whatever purpose we're doing? Come on, raise your hands. Okay. And how many are proud that you just woke up and got here this morning because you want to do lifelong? Okay, see, there's an award. Next year, you or someone submit an award and we would be proud to receive it. If you're doing OER resources, if you're doing faculty development, I mean, anything that you can say has made a difference, we would love to read about it, okay? Now, without further ado, except my computer went to sleep. Come on, hello. Okay. This year, we are proud to have 3 teams who will receive awards, one for innovation, one for impact, and one for collaboration. And we have 3 teams of people who will receive special recognition. So, the first award for innovation goes to Parents Forever, the Extension Center for Family Development. It's Kate, and please come up. Before you do, forgive me if I don't pronounce all of these names correctly. I'll do the best I can. But please have your team members come up, and I will read a little something about the nature of the project. Kate Welshens, Ellie McCann, and Sharon Powell, the University of Minnesota. So, in an effort to answer the call in the literature for greater rigor and transparency, as well as to meet the needs of a changing population in the state, the Parents Forever team, and also we'll be taking photos, forgive me for interrupting myself, The Parents Forever team at the University of Minnesota Extension Center for Family Development started the process of updating curriculum developed in the 1990s. Developing an online course, this project represents an innovative approach to addressing the needs of families experiencing divorce and separation. Seeking the expertise of colleagues with experience in academic technology, curriculum design, family life education, web developers, and participants, these designers are enhancing their understanding of issues pertinent to the project, which allows them to increase internal capacity and programmatic impact. Again, congratulations. And Danny got the photo, okay? Okay. I want to point out that the details of all of the recipients are in your packet of materials as well, with links to some of their websites if you want to check it out. The next award for collaboration goes to the Partnership for Affordable Content Program, University of Minnesota Libraries, Christy Jensen, Shane Nakrud, John Barneson, Melissa Igme Brown, and Emily Reha. The University of Minnesota Libraries Partnership for Affordable Content Program incents faculty to transition away from the use of high-cost commercial textbooks to high-quality curricular resources that are far more affordable to students. Through a competitive grants process, services are offered to support faculty adoption of such alternatives, including open textbooks, digital course packs, discounted or no-cost ebooks via a bookstore collaboration, and library licensed e-resources. The program's success is based on faculty engagement, providing small grants, and the commitment of a library team of experts to collaborate with the faculty member on his or her course. At least 10,000 students have experienced some cost savings benefit from the program since its inception in 2015. Congratulations. And I'm pleased to announce the impact winner is the Asian Penguins Linux Club, Community School of Excellence, Stu Karoff and Luke Burris. All right, I get verklempt at this moment. This is a goosebump moment for me. When we were reading the award nomination, we just kept going, this is unbelievable. So listen, check it out. The members of the Community School of Excellence's Linux Club, called the Asian Penguins, learn to install, configure, and use Linux and open source software. They then apply that knowledge to their community by recycling used computers and donating them to needy families. The club employs the power of open source to change students' worlds one computer at a time. Since the club does its own fundraising and recycles used computers, the financial impact on the school is minimal. Managing the kids, and they use the word kids, managing the kids' partners in the process is something they believe can be replicated by other schools. To date, a little more, because I think this is so influential. To date, over 150 students have been part of the Asian Penguins. They have provided over 120 computers to their school, which are used by their fellow classmates. Additionally, they have provided computers to more than 70 families with school-aged, I'm telling you, I get emotional. I cried at the last movie. Anyway, with the kids and the hugs, the virtual hugs. Additionally, they have provided computers to more than 70 families with school-aged children, to an anti-poverty nonprofit in Minneapolis, and to a sister school in Thailand. The Asian Penguins have furthered their impact by making YouTube videos about their activities. To date, their channel has received over 13,000 views in 110 countries. My heartiest congratulations. And now we have 3 special recognition winners. The first one is Minitex, Library and Information Services for All Minnesotans, Minnesota Office of Higher Education and the University of Minnesota Libraries, Valerie Horton, Matt Lee, and Mary Parker. So Minitex provides a variety of library resources to Minnesota citizens. MinLink, the Electronic Library for Minnesota, ELM, and the Minnesota eBooks. The products and services provided by Minitex provides access to a multitude of lifelong learning resources for Minnesota citizens regardless of status and location. Citizens outside of learning institutions can reserve materials from any library in the state, search newspapers and periodicals, and leverage high-quality information resources for work and life. And finally, K-12 students can learn research skills using information sources designed for their needs. I'll say one thing, when I joined the Minnesota State system 15 years ago, one of the first services I had heard about was Minitex. It gives me great pleasure after all of these years of attending so many of these conferences, even before we called it the e-learning summit, that Minitex is finally achieving what I would call a lifetime award. Congratulations. The second special recognition award goes to Collaborative Development of Faculty Online Teaching Curriculum, University of Minnesota, Nima Salahi, Christina Peterson, Sarah Hurley, Annette McNamara, Christine Riley, and Peg Shervin. So the University of Minnesota has over 4,500 faculty and 26,000 learners taking online courses just during this last academic year. As it increases the use of digital learning for in-class, hybrid, and online offerings, both faculty and instructional design teams need to be prepared. Using a collaborative framework, UMN brought together central and collegiate units to create a shared vision for a framework that now has increased buy-in and crowdsourced expertise from across the university. The resulting online teaching competencies promotes excellence in online course design and instruction, and the framework and competencies can be shared and replicated at small and large institutions throughout the US and other countries. This example of professional development is particularly key as UMN transitions to a new learning management system. And Nima and I go back to Metro State days, and again, there's so many good things here. I just goosebumps. Congratulations to a wonderful effort. And the last award, special recognition award, goes to Fostering Community Partnerships Through Health Promotion, North Hennepin Community College Nursing Program. Dana Botts, Jean Harstad, Lois Mandler, Mary Sladek, and Julie Leo. The North Hennepin Community College Nursing Program, as part of the Minnesota Alliance for Nursing Education, MANE is the acronym, began a new curriculum in 2014. Traditional nursing focuses primarily on health problems, whereas the main curriculum's emphasis is on health promotion, focusing on ways nursing holistic well-being, nursing students, that didn't sound right, focusing on ways, anyway, nursing students, I must have left a word out there. Nursing students participate in health fairs during the semester which serve as their clinicals. And these health fairs occur in facilities such as grade schools, the YMCA, homeless shelters, and assisted living facilities. Implementing these health fairs has been rewarding for the students and the organizations being served as the program helps meet a variety of healthcare initiatives. Technology is an important element of this program for students. Students who complete the health fair at the Dorothy Day Center are asked to participate in a virtual game about how easy it is to become homeless via placespent.org. I even checked it out. I went and looked it up. And both D2L and web conferencing platforms are used for students to virtually meet and complete their projects. Congratulations. And there are no other announcements. This completes it. Congratulations to everyone. Have a great lunch. We'll see you this afternoon.